to have everyone along as we begin a new week here on Fresh Outlook, where we talk about the most talked about topics of the week. I'm Toschi. Thanks for spending your time with us. Lots to talk about this week. We'll turn our attention first to Egypt, where the death toll has now climbed to more than 1,000 in the past week. What does this mean for the United States, and how is the deadly violence shaking up the already volatile Middle East? We'll also talk about the controversial stop and frisk program. While many are hailing the court's ruling this week that found stop and frisk unconstitutional, a lot of top cops say it saves lives and has made New York City the safest big city in the country. So some tough topics to talk about, but we're going to end things on a lighter note. With the summer winding down, we're going to talk about some of the big hits from Hollywood. If you haven't been to the movies yet this summer, we'll tell you what you might be missing. But first, Egypt. Now, Egypt is one of the most populous countries, spanning the northeast corner of Africa and the southwest corner of the Middle East. 84 million people live here, and many have witnessed the deadliest clashes in years. What does the violence overseas mean for Egypt, for the United States, and what does it mean for the rest of the world?
The anguished cries of outraged and grief-stricken Egyptians, bloodshed and despair. The aftermath of one of the deadliest days in Egypt. Violence began when police moved in to clear out two sit-ins housing protesters calling for Mohamed Morsi's reinstatement. The crackdown prompting clashes elsewhere in Cairo and other cities as well. The death toll is now well over 600 as the fighting continues.
These were peaceful protesters. We came to fight for our rights, and all these people here are for that cause.
Egyptian authorities have authorized police to use deadly force to protect themselves and key state institutions from attacks. In defiance of calls for restraint, Egypt's interior minister warned protesters that police were indeed authorized to use lethal force to protect themselves.
At the time when the security forces dispersed the Rabi'a al-Adawiyya sit-in, we were surprised that elements of the Muslim Brotherhood launched attacks on police and government installations and religious sites to create chaos in the country.
The ministry also promising to punish any terrorist actions and sabotage after at least 2 government buildings were burned down. Meanwhile, funeral services are held for police officers killed in clashes a day earlier. Coffins draped in flags loaded onto fire engines to be taken for burial. The Muslim Brotherhood, remaining defiant, said earlier it would not back down in the wake of violence, calling for supporters to bring down the military coup.
Certainly some sad and very disturbing images right there. Now, joining us to discuss Egypt's crisis, we have political analyst Dee Dee Benkie, who is also a member of the Republican National Committee, Dr. Dalia Fahmy, a professor of political science at Long Island University, and Ambassador Hassan, the former ambassador to Pakistan. We thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And wow, some of those pictures from Egypt are just so disturbing. I'm just going to ask if you, Professor Hassan, if you can explain to us just the humanitarian toll that this is taking on Egypt.
It's a terrific toll. It's a terrible toll. The entire world is watching, and it doesn't seem that there is an end. It was not a one-day operation. And apart from Cairo, apart from the mosque, the Rabi'a al-Adawiyya mosque, which was the center, it has spread to other areas. And we should not forget the Sinai. The Sinai has been an area of unrest for quite some time, pre this development. So yes, I think the situation is somewhat uncertain as far as that
Dr.
is
Fahmy,
concerned.
in fact, we've seen for almost the last 30 days of this continuing violence. Do you see any end in sight? I mean, it has become such a tragic, the death toll right now is over 1,300 people.
And that's the official estimate. The unofficial estimate is upwards of 5,000, let alone the official estimate of 4,000 injured. This could be upwards of 10,000 injured. And the unrest in the country is, of course, not just in the east and west of Cairo, the 2 main squares. It's also spread to Asyut, Ben Suef, Port Said, and much of the Mediterranean coast. So Egypt is seeing some of the darkest days in its modern history.
Let me ask you, it's not just military folks, and who else is being killed in these clashes?
Well, they're considered the pro-Morsi, but also the anti-coup. What we saw happen in the beginning of July was the ouster of the first democratically elected president of Egypt. And so a lot of the people in the square are not just the kind of so-called Islamist-leaning members of the Muslim Brotherhood. If we look at what the numbers actually are, the most generous estimates put the adherents of the Muslim Brotherhood or the loyalists of the Muslim Brotherhood as only 250,000. But when you see millions out in the street and many, many more sympathizing, this is really a protest against the current situation where the military has turned its guns on its own people. And so the protest is not just Islamists versus the military. This is about people who had democratically elected a leader calling for the return of their voice and their rights. And so increasingly what's the situation is turning into a struggle for democratic values and liberal values being undercut by a very, very authoritarian military establishment.
And we're also seeing a lot of mothers and children also being caught in that crossfire as well, which is heartbreaking to talk about as well. The crisis in Egypt, and Dee Dee, this is a question for you, has certainly pitted some Republicans against the White House right now. Let's talk about what this means for the U.S.
Well, I don't understand what the president's doing. I don't know why he's being so weak. I think that the Turkish prime minister is exactly right, that we need to engage and we need to try to be helpful. Why are we not calling it a coup? That's what it was. Why are we not cutting the aid? Why are we not taking a stronger stance? I think our country needs to do that, and we're not. I think it makes us look weak. I think it makes President Obama look weak. He's golfing. He should address this. And Rand Paul and Lindsey Graham are right. Call it a coup and cut the aid.